When it comes to tank kill claims and kill statistics, particularly about World War II, there's always a hot debate going on about overcounting, overclaiming, or outright lying with statistics. And as many of you know, I like a sober approach to topics, especially those that are often quite heated up. So let us start with one aspect that gets brought forward particularly often, namely that Fremde Heere Ost, the German military intelligence for the Eastern Front, noted that German tank kill claims should be divided by 2, so reduced by 50%. Some authors also note 30 to 50%. At least one author notes that this was not so much to account for deliberate increase in numbers, but due to erroneous double counting. Note that this 50% number likely shows up in several German wartime documents, yet during a trip to the German military archives that was made possible by my generous Patreon and Subscribestar supporters, I came across a Fremde Heere Ost document from October 1943, which not only notes that the 50% discount was an increase over the previous discount, but also the various reasons for the adjustments of kill claims, or better, the assumed number of destroyed Soviet tanks. As you can imagine, this document is interesting in several regards, because as so often the devil lies in the details. Let us take a look at the document. Note, there might be several versions of this document. The one I found consists of a report and appendices, including an infographic. Let us look at the infographic first. Be aware, due to German archive laws, I'm not allowed to show photographs of their documents on social media, so I have to do a reproduction, which is also more work for me. So yeah, I would prefer showing you a copy of it. Note, font sizes and various elements are different from the original, the information is not. The infographic is titled Panzerverluste Ost, meaning tank losses East, from 5th July to 31st August 1943. It has the highest security rating, namely Geheime Kommandosache, and was issued by the Panzeroffizier beim Chef des Generalstabs des Heeres, the tank officer at the Chiefs of the Army's General Staff, so not by Fremde Heere Ost. It contains 4 bars. On the left side there are the German losses, and on the right side the Soviet losses listed, although they are labeled Russian. Let us look at the Soviet losses first. Here the first bar is captioned with gemeldete Verluste, reported losses, and in parentheses Truppenmeldungen, which means troop reports. Now this can be a bit misleading, and reported kills would be more precise here, since these numbers were taken from German troops about Soviet losses. Then next to it is a bar captioned with tatsächliche Verluste, meaning actual losses. Here comes the first catch. In parentheses it is noted troop report after deduction of an experience rate for double reports and tanks capable of being repaired. And as you can clearly see, the first bar is about 2 times the size of the second bar, and since the numbers on top of the bars are almost exactly divided by 2, the term actual losses is very misleading and should be estimated losses. Yet let us look at the other side, namely the Soviet claims. Here the reported losses have in parentheses Russische Pressemeldungen, so Russian press reports, and the actual losses have the qualifier total losses of tanks and assault guns. As you can see, the factor here is not 2 to 1, but 5.27 to 1. Of course, this visual comparison is not so straightforward, since total losses for the Germans meant that the tank could not be repaired. This is quite different to knocked out tanks that were reported. Additionally, the press reports are likely a bit over the top as well. Still, seeing this infographic for the first time, since I only knew about the divide the German tank kill claims by 2 statement, was quite an interesting experience. Yet, there's more to it. Because as you might have noticed, the division by 2 is not only qualified by over-reporting, but also by the statement that tanks could be repaired in some cases. This is further explained in the statement by the Fremde Heere Ost document, which is the main document in this case, and the main title is Lecture Notice about the repair of knocked out tanks and production of tanks and assault guns in the Soviet Union from 1st October 1943. By the way, notice that Fremde Heere Ost used Soviet Union or Soviet Russian in contrast to most other German organizations that usually just used Russia or Russian, like the infographic from the tank officer. Anyway, in the section about Soviet tank maintenance and repairs, there are 5 points listed, which lead to a conclusion. A part of the first point is this sentence. In the course of the first year of the war, due to the rapid advance of our troops, there was generally no possibility for the Soviet Union to recover the tanks that had been knocked out. The second point is, in the course of the last year, not only were efficient repair units created among the fighting troops for short-term repair and lightly damaged tanks, but also a large number of small establishments, mainly tractor and railroad repair shops and special areas near the front, were converted to long-term repair of badly damaged tanks, which until then could be done only in the tank factories. The third point notes that the Soviets attach importance to the recovery of tanks, noting that cash rewards are offered for the tank recovery based on type and the location of the tank, like enemy territory, with reference to a captured document. It is noted that these cash bonuses probably accounted for the rapid recovery of knocked out tanks. Thus, in August 1943, when Army Group South was reclaiming terrain occupied by the enemy, it found by recording the number of enemy tanks left on the battlefield that this figure was only 41% of the tanks reported as knocked out by the army in the preceding battles. Therefore, 59% had to be regarded as having been towed by the enemy in the intervening period or as false or double reports. The fourth point noted various Soviet tank formations reportedly received repaired tanks instead of new tanks from the factories. And finally, point 5. Various other reports also indicate that numerous knocked out tanks are being repaired, see Appendix 6. These points are then followed by the conclusion, which states, in the calculations of the presumed strength of the Soviet-Russian tank formations on the basis of the loss and production figures, this was taken into account from July 1943 onward by deducting a total of 50% from the reported loss figures, instead of only 20% for false or duplicate reports, as had been the case previously. So in other words, Fremde Heere Ost only discounted German tank kill claims by 20%, not 50% for the period mentioned in the document. Yet referring to the assumed increase in effectiveness and efficiency of Soviet capabilities of bringing back killed tanks to the battlefield, this percentage was increased to 50%. At least this was the internal German explanation for the 50% discount in October 1943. So keep in mind that the number might be different later, and also that this explanation might not be correct. Now, before someone has a moment of MHV, so what you're saying is that we should trust German tank kill claims, I want to clearly state that this does not mean that German or any other faction's kill claims are generally to be considered valid. Nope, this just means that one needs to look closely at the context of certain statements, particularly when it comes to primary sources. And speaking of German primary sources, Chris from Military Aviation History and I currently have an Indiegogo campaign running for the translation of key documents about the famous German dive bomber, the Junkers 87 Stuka. Of course, we added a lot of additional information to these documents in the footnotes to provide the proper context as well. Already around 1000 people have helped fund the project, allowing us to add a lot of additional documents into the book. If you want to learn more, check out this video or click the link in the pinned comment. Yet back to the subject of the video, namely the claim about lying with statistics. I think it is important to point out that lying implies intent. In other words, wrong information is not necessarily a lie. There could be numerous reasons for this, a simple error, a complicated error, or other aspects. As such, I want to take a look at other potential sources for erroneous claims. So let's go deeper. The first problem is that the reporting system and its associated technology just might not be up to the task. We live in a time now where a single smartphone has probably more computing power than every machine in 1942 combined. There was no Excel back then. There was no internet. Information transfer was comparatively extremely slow for anything that could not be transferred via radio. There are examples where the Germans renamed their own units and at least one of these units did not receive that information for months. A particularly noteworthy example here is the reporting of German losses during the Second World War. Rüdiger Overmans notes in his book about German World War II losses, referring to statistics from 1944 on Wehrmacht's deaths caused by enemy fire. Apparently, the Wehrmacht was not able to record the losses of the first short and, compared to the Eastern Campaign, administratively easy campaigns. Surprisingly, this is all the more true the smaller the losses were, as the data on the occupation of Norway show. This was not the only problem, there were severe discrepancies between the various reporting systems. By the end of June 1944, therefore about 10,000 officers, the entire officer strength of about 20 divisions, were already missing or died, more than the army surgeon's figures suggested. The second problem is far closer to the troops themselves, namely that in the heat of battle, which by definition is a significant emotional event, certain errors are likely to be made. One particularly interesting aspect for me was the Battle of Vella la Vella, because here we have estimates from both sides. First, the actual numbers. The Japanese lost 1 destroyer, whereas the US forces lost 1 destroyer and 2 more were heavily damaged. Whereas both sides assumed they had achieved quite more. On the Japanese side, Admiral Ichuin claimed sinking 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers. Meanwhile, the US commander of the destroyer group, Captain Walker, believed that he had sunk 3 destroyers and damaged several others. Of course, some people might insist that this is the result of glory hounds and career officers, which might be the case, although I go with a benefit of doubt here. I am not the type of guy that states he must know because he was there, but I also know when I sit in a tin can in the middle of the night in the Pacific Ocean and somebody's shooting shells at me that are bigger than my fists, I probably fail a lot of perception rolls among some other rolls as well. Yet back to the Germans. The following passage is from a guideline for using Stukas against ships that will be included in the upcoming book. In the shallow dive procedure, the sinking of merchant ships of any size would be guaranteed by Kette of U-87. As an example of this, 3 attacks by Sturzkampfgeschwader 1 against convoys in the outer Thames estuary on 1st November, 8th November and 11th November 1940, in each of which 18 to 21 aircraft of the group were employed. Sinking figures 28,000, 18,000 and 37,000 tons, thus a total of 83,000. Yet Chris looked into the British files here and it looks like only 3 to 4 ships were damaged in the referenced attacks. Considering that the German Luftwaffe intended to use this document to have a basic idea about the necessary number of planes and bombs to sink a ship, it makes little sense here that they would inflate their success. Of course, it can't be completely ruled out, but it is rather unlikely. To summarize, generally kill claims should not be taken at face value. Yet if an organization applied a general discount on such numbers, the reason given should be taken into account. And of course, they might not be true neither. In our first case, if the stated reasons by Fremdlehrer Ost are correct, then the discount was mostly influenced by an increase in effectiveness and efficiency of Red Army's ability to refuel destroyed tanks in large numbers. Additionally, although in war and also in peace there's a fair share of glory hounds, quite often inflated kill claims can simply result from the heat of battle, not necessarily propaganda. If you spot an enemy tank a few hundred meters away, you probably want to put a round into it before confirming that it was not already abandoned or destroyed by somebody else. Unless you have a death wish. There are examples where 1 tank kill was claimed by the armor, infantry and also other arms, simply due to the fact that they selected to fire first and ask questions later. Of course, one cannot rule out that numbers were intentionally forged, changed or otherwise adapted for personal gain, propaganda or other reasons. There are clear cases where this happened, yet if one finds a deviation, it could be an error. There are many reasons why errors happen: memory, writing, transmission, misunderstandings, etc. Not to mention that the whole reporting system might have serious flaws as well. Remember, lying implies intent, whereas negligence, incompetence or a bad day are quite different to malice. But I might be biased here, since looking at Austrian bureaucracy and the YouTube comment section, I see mostly incompetence, not malice. Well, I hope you learned something new. Big thank you here to Chris from Military Aviation History for providing extra information about the Luftwaffe, and to Andrew for reviewing the script. Special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar for making videos like this possible. Sources are listed in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.